Good morning, everyone. I am City Councilor Ricardo Arroyo, Chair of the Committee on Government Operations. It is Thursday, June 16th, 2022, and we are here today for a remote hearing on docket number 465, petition for a special law regarding an act authorizing additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on the premises in Boston. Referred to the committee on April 6, 2022. The sponsors of docket 0465 are Councilors Brown, Warrell, Rusi, Louis-Jan, and myself. And docket 435, petition for a special law regarding an act authorizing the city of Boston to grant 4 additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on the specified premises, referred to the committee on March 30th, 2022. The sponsors of docket 435 are Councilors Rusi, Louis-Jan, and Julia Mejia. In accordance with Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022, modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirements that public bodies conduct its meetings in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom and is being recorded. This enables the City Council to carry out its responsibilities while ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this hearing via live stream at www.boston.gov, City Council TV, and on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, Verizon 964. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date. Written comments may be sent to the committee email at ccc.go@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all councilors. Public testimony will be taken at the end of this hearing. If you wish to sign up for public testimony and have not done so, please email Christine O'Donnell at Christine.O'Donnell, O'Donnell, at boston.gov for the link, and your name will be added to the list. This morning, I'm joined by my council colleagues, Council President Ed Flynn, Councilor Brian Worrell, Councilor Frank Baker, Councilor Julia Mejia, and Councilor Lucy Louis-Jen. Both home rule petitions before us concern granting additional liquor licenses to the city of Boston by the way of the licensing board. For docket 0435, this home rule petition, originally offered by Councilor Louis-Jen Mejia, would provide the ability for the licensing board of the city of Boston, notwithstanding section 17, chapter 138 of the Massachusetts general laws, to grant 4 additional licenses, which includes the sale of alcoholic beverages to the restricted location of the Bruce C. Bowling Municipal Building, which is located at 2300 Washington Street in the Roxbury neighborhood in the city of Boston. These liquor licenses would be non-transferable to any other person's corporation or organization, and language written on the license would clearly mark restricted to the Bruce C. Bowling Municipal Building and non-transferable. For docket number 465, this home rule petition was originally offered by Councilors Worrell, Louis-Jen, and myself, and would also allow the licensing board of the city of Boston, notwithstanding section 17, chapter 138 of the Massachusetts general laws, to grant up to 200 non-transferable all alcohol liquor licenses over a period of 3 years to be drunk on the premises specified in section 12 of chapter 138, earlier referenced in the following neighborhoods of Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, and Hyde Park. These liquor licenses would only be limited to businesses with a total capacity of 50 persons or under. This would be determined by the city's Inspectional Services Department and the Boston Fire Department. The language in this home rule petition also states that if a license is revoked or canceled, that it be returned physically with all legal rights, privileges, and restrictions to the licensing board to be granted to a new application meeting the same requirements. This home rule petition would also increase all liquor licenses in the city of Boston by at least 10% over a 10-year period. This hearing is an opportunity for councilors to hear from the administration on the impact of both of these home rule petitions and to hear from advocates, as well as public testimony. With that said, as chair, I'll be limiting councilor openings. I want to give councilors who are here a chance to say an opening, but I'm asking you to keep it brief because we do have some folks on time restrictions. I would start with our original co-sponsors, so Councilor Worrell, Louis-Jen, and Mejia, and then we'll turn it over to others in order of arrival. For the administrative panel, we have Kathleen Joyce, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Consumer Affairs and Licensing and Chairwoman of the Licensing Board for the City of Boston. Danny Green, the Executive Secretary of the Licensing Board for the City of Boston. Alicia Porcina, Director of Small Businesses for the City of Boston. Midori Morikawa, Interim Chief Economic Development for the City of Boston. And so I'm going to start by handing it over to our councilors who are original sponsors, beginning with Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Chair. I think you should start with Councilor Rusi Louis-Jen because she was the original, the lead co-sponsor for the
Perfect. Happy to do it. Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilor Mejia. There are two home rule petitions before us. One that I sponsored along with Councilor Mejia regarding giving 4 non-transferable restricted liquor licenses to the bowling building. And in addition, one that Councilor Worrell took the lead on with 200 restricted licenses to Mattapan, Hyde Park, and Dorchester. So the full expanse of these two home rule petitions cover the neighborhoods of Hyde Park, Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan, all to make sure that we are infusing our neighborhoods with more economic activity. We know that our neighborhoods suffer from decades of disinvestment. And so what we're attempting to do here is to generate more business and economy in our neighborhoods. The bowling building one is a special one, given that the bowling building is owned by the city of Boston. We are looking to amend that home rule petition to add the Strand Theater in there to maximize our efforts before the State House and to generate revenue and economic activity in Dorchester and in Roxbury. We know that having gathering spots, social gathering spots in our neighborhood are important. There are other neighborhoods that are really thriving. When you look at the North End, when you look at other parts of the city that really are really take advantage of having a number of liquor licenses in their neighborhood. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to do that here in our neighborhoods. That I live in Hyde Park, and I'd like to have more restaurants where I can have social gatherings, where I can have meetings that also serve alcohol. And we know that serving alcohol attracts a lot of folks to those businesses. So I'm looking forward to this hearing. I'm thankful for my co-sponsors and to the administration for being here to help us push this forward. We've heard from a lot of people, constituents, business owners and restaurant owners about this issue. So I know there's a lot of interest. I know my colleague, Councilor Worrell, has done a lot of work to get us here. So excited for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. I know we have a hard stop from Kathleen Joyce. If you would like to go, if the councilors are willing to let Kathleen Joyce just speak, because I believe she has a hard stop at 10:30. If Kathleen Joyce from the administration would like to say anything in an opening or her remarks, the floor is yours.
I'm just here to answer questions, but my colleague, Alicia Porcina, was going to offer some statements on behalf of the administration.
Perfect. So when we get to the administration, then I'll let her do that. Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. In that case, Councilor Mejia.
Yeah, I'm not going to take up too much time because I know we're in a time constraint. Just wanted to echo my colleagues' sentiments. I think this is an amazing opportunity to expand economic and prosperity across the city, specifically in the Bruce Bowling Building. We know that we have a lot of work to do in that area. So I'm just here to support and answer any questions and provide some input in terms of what's going to be the best path forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell.
Thank you, Chair Royal. Thank you for the administration and all the advocates on this call, and all my colleagues attending this hearing. We often use the word equity, and if we are focused on outcomes, we will ensure that Bostonians will be able to see visually or grasp and experience equity, grasp and experience our collaborative efforts to create equitable outcomes, creating more jobs, closing the wealth gap, enriching the quality of life for our residents, as well as making our neighborhoods a destination location. Every neighborhood deserves to have walkable amenities, places to gather, convene, and to build community. When we invest in our local businesses, we are investing in our neighborhoods. This is why we are being corrective and intentional in our investments and focusing on those neighborhoods that have been historically disenfranchised and marginalized when it comes to attaining liquor licenses here in the city of Boston. Out of the 1,448 liquor licenses in our city, only 2 restaurants have liquor licenses in Mattapan, and only 6 restaurants on Blue Hill Ave. I believe the creation of liquor licenses gets us closer to realizing equitable goals. We also have the opportunity to provide local businesses assistance by exploring coordinated efforts to couple licenses with technical assistance and commercial rebates to offset startup costs and better prepare our local business owners for the restaurant industry. After further research and meeting with key stakeholders, I look forward to the working session where I'll be presenting my changes to the home rule petition on increasing the capacity size, the amount of years we roll out the liquor license, and the numbers to be issued to the city of Boston. I also want to thank Congresswoman Presley, Mayor Walsh, and the many other advocates who have worked on this issue in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. And now in order of arrival, and I want to note that we've been joined by Councilor Baker. I'm going to start with Councilor Ed Flynn, if he has anything you'd like to say, and then Councilor Baker, if you have anything you'd like to say before we go over to the panel. So Councilor Flynn, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the sponsors. Thank you to the administration team that's also here. I'm here to listen and to learn more about this and to support my colleagues in this effort. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You, Councilor Flynn. Councilor Baker, if you have anything you'd like to say before we go to the administration.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, I'm generally in support of these applications. The devil is in the details. I look forward to moving forward. I was involved in the original when we granted the neighborhood licenses, and my district certainly benefited from that. But we were also ready as far as the development and people willing to come in and execute on those. So I look forward to helping the councils through this, and just some general questions around different applications. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to the administration. Again, we're joined by Kathleen Joyce, the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Consumer Affairs and Licensing and Chairwoman of the Licensing Board for the City of Boston. Danny Green, the Executive Secretary of the Licensing Board for the City of Boston. Alicia Porcina, Director of Small Business for the City of Boston, and Midori Morikawa, Interim Chief of Economic Development for the City of Boston. And so if you have a presentation order or however you want to do it, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairperson Arroyo, members of the Committee on Government Operations, and members of the Boston City Council. My name is Alicia Porcina, and I'm the Director of Small Business for the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, and I'm joined by my colleagues here. Thank you for the opportunity to share the perspective of the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion on docket 0435, petition for a special law, an act authorizing the City of Boston to grant 4 additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on specified premises. We appreciate the sponsors of this home rule petition, Councilors Ruth Z. Louisiane and Julia Mejia, for introducing this matter, as well as those councilors who signed on in support of this initiative. Chief Iduo couldn't be here today, so I'm reading this letter on his behalf and on the Cabinet's behalf. As you know, the vision of our office is one of a resilient, economically equitable, sustainable, vibrant city that centers people and creates opportunities to build generational wealth. We are also committed to employing all strategies to help revitalize the Boston economy as we emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. The proposal before this body today will help us move closer to realizing that vision. Liquor licenses are an important tool to help small businesses and cultural institutions both grow their revenue and provide more appealing opportunities for friends, families, and neighbors to socialize and build community. We are grateful for the opportunity to work with our colleagues on the Boston City Council on efforts to both increase the number of available liquor licenses and ensure their equitable distribution. Docket 0435 will aid these efforts, providing licenses for the Bruce C. Bowling Building, which includes 2 existing BIPOC-owned restaurants, Soleil and Dudley Cafe, with a 3rd, Jazz Urbane, set to break ground later this year, and for other small businesses and cultural institutions across the city that will help support ongoing cultural programming and allow for cross-subsidies from expanded event hosting opportunities. Docket 0435 is the first step of what will be a larger effort in partnership with our colleagues on this Boston City Council to expand the number of available liquor licenses. Providing these licenses for these specific locations will help remove the costly burden of acquiring them on the open market, which contributes to the inequitable distribution of these wealth building tools and will aid the recovery effort for communities that have been the hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. We look forward to the discussion on this matter and to working with our city and state colleagues to swiftly adopt this measure. Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know if there's anyone, I think Alicia Porcina. Was there another opening for the administration?
No, I think Alicia was taking the lead, and Danny and I are here to ask any questions that people may have as far as the regulatory process.
So I know you have to leave shortly. So basically, I want to make sure if anybody has a question specifically for Kathleen Joyce, that they raise their hand or let me know. I see Frank, Councilor Baker, you've unmuted yourself. So if you would just like to ask your question.
Yeah, so if we're talking about the bowling building now, just clarification, with 4 licenses, there's 2 licenses there now, so there'll be 6 licenses at this location.
From what I understand, there are 4 spaces there that have commercial kitchens that these licenses would go to. Should the place that has a beer and wine license now want to apply for one of the all alcohol licenses, that beer and wine license would be returned to the city.
Oh, okay, so the 2 places now are just beer and wine, Kathleen. Good morning, by the way. How are you, Kathleen?
Good morning. Nice to see you. I think they would be. I think the 2 that they have there now would be returned to the city. They would have to be returned to the city.
And beer and wine is good to come back to the city. There's a lot of need for those. And I also had a question. I think I'm not sure if Councilor Louis-Jean said it or not, but is there new language that is going to grant the Strand a license, that we're looking to grant the Strand a license also? And is that going to be just operational? Like, who will that be owned by? Because I'm assuming it's for just events going in. Will that be owned by someone that's managing the Strand now, or by the city of Boston? How will that work?
I don't think that's a part of this legislation. I know that there are some conversations in the administration for arts and culture spaces in general. And I know they're discussing places like the Strand, but I could be wrong, but I don't think that's part of this bowling building.
Okay, I thought there was going to be a change of language, but I guess that maybe will be a different application or whatever. I'm not sure. I may have just heard. Oh, Ruchi has her hand up now. Maybe she can answer. Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you, Councilor Baker. And Councilor Louis-Jean, I was going to go to Councilor Worrell, but if you would like to chime in.
Yeah, just chiming in to say that the goal, since bowling building is city owned as is the Strand Theater, it's to get them all together in one, to package similar requests together and to get that license for the Strand Theater. And it would be based for the Strand Theater, but the operator of the Strand Theater would obviously, right now the Strand Theater has been asking for 1-day licenses. And so we're trying to make it easier for them to be able to not have to go to the city, not have to ask every time, so they could just have the blanket license. So we are looking to roll that into this petition.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. Councilor Worrell, if you have any questions.
Yes.
Specifically, Kathleen Joyce.
Chair. Yep. Thank you, Chair. And hi, Kathleen. Just 2 quick questions for you, Kathleen. Can you tell me if there was any effect on the transferable license value? When we introduced this previously, non-transferable licenses in the past, and then is there a waiting list for a liquor license? If so, how many people on that waiting list, and how many liquor licenses does the city have available now?
Thanks, Councilor. To address, I think your first question was about the value of the current liquor licenses in the market. Has that been depleted at all by the addition of non-transferable licenses? Is that your question? Again, those are like private transactions that we don't regulate. When someone buys a license from another entity, that's a private transaction, and the market sort of sets that rate. Anecdotally, we haven't seen a dilution of the value of the current liquor licenses out there based upon the infusion of the last group of licenses in 2014. The second part was, do we have a waiting list? We don't have a waiting list. We track license applications as they come in. We check in with licensees to see if they're still looking to, should a license come back to the city, we would go back to our recent agendas to see if applicants were still interested in pursuing that. Sometimes when we find public need for a license at a hearing, the vote would be public need pending, we find public need pending the availability of the license. Sometimes licensees choose to get that public need on the record, then they go out and they decide to buy a license on the open market. So should we go back to them, I would imagine their need would not be the same. We don't have a waiting list because those needs change.
Do we know how many applications we have of restaurant or small business owners looking to obtain a liquor license?
I don't have that number.
All right. Yeah, that was my only two questions for Kathleen.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. I don't know if Councilor Louis Jen, if you have any questions.
No, I'm all set. Thank you, Kathleen, for being here. I'll follow up if I have any additional questions.
Councilor Mejia, if you have any questions.
No, thank you. And thank you, Kathleen, for being here with us today. It's good to see you. No questions. Thank you.
That only leaves Councilor Flynn if you have any questions for Kathleen before we release her so she can go to her hard stop. Looks like no. So thank you, Kathleen, for being with us here today. And I'm glad we could honor your hard stop at 10:30. So thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. And so we're going to go in order of arrival for the speaking order for questions for the entire panel. And so Councilor Worrell, that means you, followed by Councilor Louis Jen, followed by Councilor Mejia, followed by Council President Flynn, and then followed by Councilor Baker. So Councilor Worrell, floor is yours if you have any questions.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question for the panel, and it's just about making sure that these efforts are coordinated and we're getting the impact that we want when we're issuing these new license. So, what have we learned, from past initiatives, and what can we put in place to make sure, I think Councilor Baker has alluded to this, that it sounds like it's getting businesses on board, getting developers on board, but what practices and structures and infrastructure can we put together to make sure that we are having the impact that we want, making sure that these licenses get to Hyde Park, get to areas of Dorchester that need it in Mattapan.
Yep. So I can just quickly answer the question, Danny and Alicia, feel free to add in as well. So, obviously, we support any investments in our neighborhoods, and especially supporting our small businesses and restaurants and food establishments through liquor licenses. And I think one of the things that we learned, right, during pandemic, and certainly the last year, is that a lot of these, liquor license process application, our team is equipped in providing technical assistance and making sure that people feel supported as they navigate the system to make sure that they're filling out all the forms right and just doing everything that they can to put their best foot forward on that. So that's one thing that we have discussed doing as we expand the liquor license across the city. How can we make sure that linguistically, culturally, we are providing services to support small businesses in obtaining licenses?
Yeah, thank you, Midori, and thank you, Councilor Worrell. This is something we've been talking about quite a lot between the licensing board and the Office of Economic Opportunity and Inclusion, is developing a TA program specifically for restaurant operators, because it is more than just figuring out how to fill out the forms, but then also should you receive a license at the end, there's a responsibility that comes with that as well, and we want to make sure that we are equipping these businesses to really responsibly manage and operate these licenses and be able to flourish, because right now that's not necessarily something that we have great capability for, is having actually coaching these businesses through running a liquor license. So we would like to see that happen so we can develop the pipeline of applications in these neighborhoods and let them run successfully.
Awesome. And is there any way to couple the technical assistance in this pipeline with actual rebates or any funds, maybe build out a bar or help with the build out of a restaurant, or or even with lawyer fees to help with the assistance of getting these licenses? Is there any way that we could couple actual funds or rebates with this application process?
Yeah, so a couple of things. Our small business office, led by Alicia Porcena, does have a technical assistance program to help small businesses. A wide variety of things, right? Legal, as you mentioned, is one of them. So we pay third-party legal lawyers and match them with our small businesses and provide assistance in whatever they need, and we pay for that service. And anything from ranging from website to marketing, any thing that you need in order to run a successful business in the city of Boston. I know we mentioned this our chief mentioned this during our ARPA hearing a few weeks ago, but we are looking at a rebate program in around major commercial districts to help offset some of the cost in terms of rent, outfit, and anything that operational, because as you said, that is one of the barriers, right, for people to start a business and expand into various locations. So we're still developing specific designs of the program. So we look forward to engaging in a conversation with you and your fellow counselors and hope to have something for you in the next few months.
Thank you for that. And yes, I would love to explore, coupling, that type of program with this application. Restaurant industry is already a high risk one. It takes high capital. So would love to make sure that we are at least, for giving restaurant business owners a license is, starting them off on the right foot. No further question, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. Councilor Louis-Jean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the administration for answering our questions. I have one additional question, just piggybacking for clarity. So, the 4 licenses that would come to the bowling building, if they were to go, let's say, for example, to the 2 businesses that are currently operating and then 2 new businesses, the existing restricted liquor licenses would revert to the city for application by other businesses in the neighborhood, because I believe those are neighborhood-based licenses. And at what cost would they be to restaurants looking to buy them? Just for clarity for everyone who is on this call and folks who are listening who are not familiar with the process.
Thank you. So I believe I might be out of line here, but I believe there's 1 liquor license currently being operated within the bowling building, which is a beer and wine neighborhood restricted. So if that operator were to want one of these 4 all alcohol licenses, that beer and wine license would return to the city as it is neighborhood restricted, and there is no a license from the city has no cost assigned to it aside from the annual renewal fee and the application fee.
So what would the process be for someone to acquire that? Because I think my councilor colleague, Brian Worrell, asked about a waiting list. There is no waiting list. So what would be the process for someone to obtain that liquor license, that neighborhood restricted beer and wine liquor license?
It would be the same process as any other application before the board. They would fill out the same application form, have a hearing before the licensing board, and if they were granted, pending availability of a license for which they qualify, if they were within Roxbury or the neighborhood where that license went to, and if they would qualify and the board found public need, that license may go to them.
Okay, and then just so clarity after the legislation, that Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, then Counselor, what do we have data on the number of licenses that Mattapan received? And my understanding is that it wasn't that many. And can you explain why that happened?
So I was not here then. My understanding is none of those licenses from the 2014 legislation you're referring to went to Mattapan. Again, I don't know. I was not here at that time, nor was the chair. My understanding is there were no applications for Mattapan for those licenses at the time those were doled out in 2014, 15, and 16. But I would have to look further to get you, the accurate answer.
Okay, and I guess another question, when were the last new liquor licenses approved under the allocation that was given in 2014?
Yep, those were doled out in 3 tranches in 2014, 15, and 16.
Okay, and so there were no more neighborhood licenses left after that, and therefore anyone who wanted to acquire a license thereafter, a full liquor license, had to do so on the open market.
Yes, unless a license were to somehow come back in the interim, either from a restaurant closing that had a restricted license or through
Right.
renewal, but that's right.
Right, okay, thank you so much. Those are my questions for now.
Thank you, Councilor Louis-Jean. Councilor Mejia.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of want to just follow the thread a little bit in regards to some of the questions that Councilor Worrell asked, because I do believe that the one thing is to have these licenses available. The other piece of it is how do we get them into the hands of the people who need it most, right? I think that that's oftentimes where I always see we're resource rich but coordination poor in terms of just getting people what they need. So I'm just curious, as we start thinking about this, what are some of the what's the game plan in terms of communication rollout? Just curious about kind of how we're going to set ourselves up for success. And what are some of the barriers that you potentially foresee folks experiencing, and then how can we get ahead of that? I don't know if that question is appropriate for this here, Councilor Arroyo, but I do want to have a better understanding, just because we are going to be passing this home rule petition. And I think that we have to think positively that this is going to pass. And if it does, I just kind of want to hear kind of a plan of action and implementation.
Sure. So there's, I will just say, should these, additional licenses be, issued by the state, the licensing board is ready to operationalize at any time. We, hold hearings consistently. We will always be willing to hear any application that comes that is eligible for any of these licenses. I think the piece of getting folks teed up and ready to apply and then ready to receive these licenses and operate them well really will be a function of the TA program that we would like to start with the Office of Small Business and with Economic Opportunity and Inclusion. I think the details, I don't know that they're fully fleshed out yet at this time, but that's what we would like to do, I think, following this, to make sure that we are ready if and when we do get these additional licenses from the state. And Midori or Alicia, I don't know if there's anything further you want to add about that partnership.
Yeah, absolutely. Danny is right in terms of your communication plan. I do think we did learn an awful lot, during COVID on how the information gets to the communities most in need, and they're not always like a traditional way, right? Like emails that a lot of us used to hear. So I know a lot of neighborhood business managers that walk up and around our main streets and other commercial districts to try to make sure that businesses are aware of different grant programs that they may be eligible to apply for. So I think we will do a lot of the grassroots sort of approach to that. And thanks to Alicia's team, diverse team, we do have a many language capability. We could do better, but we do have that, and we've also been working with our Office of Neighborhood Services to do these neighborhood walks and just being visible, right, and just making sure that people are aware to make sure that there's no information gap for our communities.
I lit up, y'all, when I heard the language interpretation and just because they're, that's definitely one of the biggest barriers for a lot of folks. We have Haitian restaurants, Latinx. And so it's just great that you all are being super mindful of making sure that these small businesses also recognize this unique opportunity and that they're set up for success. So I really do appreciate you, Midori, including that, because I was about to ask, and I appreciate that. Thank you. No further questions, Councilor Arroyo. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Baker, you're next. So Councilor Baker, if you have any questions, the floor is yours.
So when do we get into, I know it's probably a question for Brian again, more so it's 200 non-transferable licenses. So how are they breaking down into neighborhoods, and is it like, how are we rolling those out? Is it 5 per neighborhood in first year, or how is that going to work? 200 over how many years, over into what neighborhoods?
Yeah, Councilor Baker, I'd like to, work that out in the working session.
Okay.
That works for you.
Yeah. Okay. And to speak a little bit about, because in the original legislation, which I was part of, it really came down to development happening in neighborhoods that had, like, a lot of my neighborhoods didn't have the development or the money or the investment coming in, 20 years ago. And it kind of hit as we had investment coming into, Adams Corner got a couple of the licenses, and Dot Ave got a couple of licenses. So I think there were 6 or 7 of them anyway that came to District 3 and really helped my my business areas, but there needs investment. There needs to, you need to have somehow private investment coming into your, into neighborhoods that are going to have city help. It's not going to be all driven by city resources, because speaking from experience, I had a restaurant. I owned a restaurant. I took a rundown storefront that I rehabbed myself. I went through the zoning process myself. I went through the licensing process myself. It was a huge commitment. And then when you got all that done, you have to operate the restaurant, and that's, 12 hours a day. And so it's a big investment, not only just dollars, but also time, that restaurant industry. And, not everybody wants to do that. I mean, it's easier to just, I guess, have a job someplace, but yeah, I think as a district councilor, Brian, your role in shepherding this through into your neighborhood is going to be about how are you gonna get dollars into your neighborhood, and also you need some kind of density also. So you have to almost advocate for density and development, which goes counter what some people are thinking now. To be able to get those restaurants in on your commercial districts and be able to be supported. You need people walking there. You need people that live around there. You need people that live in the neighborhood and are gonna go to your restaurant to say hi to Brian 3 nights a week and get dinner for myself and my kids, that sort of thing. Takeout. It may be you're sitting twice a week. So that's a little bit off topic and not necessarily legislative. It's very much about community building, I think. But that's, you're the new district city councilor up there, Brian. So I think you have a unique way to go about this. So I don't know if that added to the conversation as far as the legislation is concerned, but it's more than just the legislation and having the licenses available. It's a lot of community building. So that's what I found. That's what I had development on its way when this was all happening. So we cultivated it and allowed businesses to come in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Baker, for that. And as our district does have a good amount of new projects coming on board, up and down Dorchester Ave, Blue Hill Ave, and it's just different pockets of the neighborhood. And our constituents and our neighbors are asking for more commercial spaces in those developments. So we hope to see more spaces, and also those existing restaurants that are operating now that might have the size to do more sitting. We want to also make sure that they have the ability to obtain a license as well.
Councilor Arroyo, I'm gonna raise my hand.
Yeah, that's so. Right now, before we go to the advocates panel, who I think are all actually here, I want to make sure everybody, if you have any follow-up questions or any questions for the panel that is still here, and I'm going to start with you, Councilor Mejia, but for anybody who is still here, just raise your hand. I'm not going to go through everybody and see if you have, so just raise your Zoom hand and let me know. But Councilor Mejia, floor is yours.
Yeah, I just wanted to just follow Councilor Baker's just kind of train of thought here, is just that there is definitely a lot that needs to be thought through and explored in terms of how do we set up these businesses for success, for that foot traffic and for all that. Because one thing is to go ahead and secure that license, and then the other is how do we support them to ensure that they're bringing in the revenue to continue to stay open, because all of those things go hand in hand, because otherwise we're going to keep finding ourselves in these conversations where we are securing licenses for Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, but then we're not setting up these businesses up for success. So I just think it's something for us to continue to think about as we explore this conversation. And that might be, Councilor Roel, I'm not a district counselor, so I know that Councilor Baker was speaking specifically to you in terms of kind of like how you set up your constituents up for success. But I do think that there is something there for us to ponder on and figure out how we can support the administration, whether it be through a separate hearing order or some other piece of work that we can do collectively, so that we're leaning into this conversation to help support these folks up for success. So I do appreciate Councilor Baker's input in regards to keeping those doors open. And that's it. Thank you, Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. With that, I believe if there's no further questions for, I see Councilor Worrell has his hand up. Councilor Worrell, the floor is yours.
Just one last question for the administration is, do you guys, I guess this question for Danny, based on the application, do you see a need for more neighborhood restricted licenses? Is it like how much is that demand for the applications for licenses?
Yeah, there's definitely more of a demand than there is for licenses right now. As Kathleen was saying, at our hearings, when someone applies for a new license, they are granted pending the availability of a license for which they qualify. And right now, that is, most new applications we get because there aren't licenses right now.
And if you had to ballpark it, Danny, like 10, 50, 100, 1,000, like if you had to ballpark it.
I would have to get you the exact number. I think in the past year, there was probably in the ballpark of 40 to 50 applications that we were not able to fulfill that came before the board. But again, we don't know what the need would be should we actually get these licenses. We don't know if that's because that's the real need out there or that's just what folks know because they know there aren't licenses for them. So demand seems low. We frankly don't know.
Awesome. And then just any feedback on the current home rule petition from the administration?
No, not at this time. We'll give it a closer look and think about how to operationalize it should it move forward.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Worrell. If there's no further hands, I don't see any further hands, I'm going to release the administration. Though if you would like to stay and hear from the advocates, that would be welcome. I'm going to introduce the advocates now. We are joined today by Steve Clark, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the Massachusetts Restaurant Association, Nia Grace, owner of Daryl's Corner Bar and Kitchen and co-founder of the Boston Black Hospitality Coalition, Jody Adams, founding member and co-chair of Massachusetts Restaurants United, Chris Maxey is accountant advisor from Prefix Accountants, and Nick Korn, principal of Offsite. And so with that, I'm going to go in the order that I've introduced you. If you have any quick opening statements. And so that's starting with Steve Clark, followed by Nia Grace, followed by Jody Adams, followed by Chris Maxey, followed by Nick Korn. So Steve Clark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Arroyo. Good morning. Thank you for chairing this committee and to all the councilors for their active participation. As the chair said, my name is Stephen Clark. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Mass Restaurant Association. And I'm here to offer a few comments on both pieces of legislation, and I'm happy to offer some other comments on some of the issues that we've been talking about in the last go around as councils have asked questions about successive restaurants and how we drive successive restaurants. So to start off, I just want to offer support of 0435. This is an important piece of legislation. There's been a number of attempts over the past couple of years to increase the number of licenses in the bowling building, and this is a no-brainer, and it makes perfect sense. So Mass Restaurant Association just wants to go on the record in support of this legislation. Moving over to 0465, we want to go on the record in support of the idea of more licenses. We absolutely need more licenses in the neighborhoods that are mentioned, and this is the way to get it done. I want to raise a couple of questions actually on Section 2. I think Section 2 is a really, really interesting idea as it attempts to address the supply and demand model that drives the license acquisition cost in the city. I do think it gets a little more complicated, and I think the complication of the issues in Section 2 are going to slow down the progress of what we're trying to accomplish in Section 1. Some of the questions that might come up should Section 2 pass as it is right now is who gets those new licenses? Is it a first come, first served basis? What neighborhoods do they go into? Do they go to those aforementioned license of applying but can't actually get one. We've been talking with a couple of different restaurant operators that are trying to go into neighborhoods that don't have those licenses and are on those lists. And so they may not technically be considered a waiting list, but there are a number of those restaurants that are trying to expand their businesses. And so, would they get those licenses? Could they go anywhere in the city? Could they go to the Back Bay? Could they go to the Seaport, which kind of goes against everything we're trying to accomplish with Section 1. So I just think that Section 2 is really well intentioned, and I think it's a good idea, but I think it needs more vetting and more conversation of how that's actually going to roll out. And I wouldn't want to see any hindrance of what we're actually trying to do in Section 1. So inherently there's a need for licenses in those neighborhoods, and I wouldn't want to see the legislation slow down as we get into the much more in-depth conversation of undoing 70 years of the quota system in the city and what that's going to take. Every time over the last 10 years, every time we've had those conversations, when you pull on one string, another string does have a reaction. And so there are some intended consequences, but there's also unintended consequences. And again, don't want to slow down the progress of what we're truly trying to do, which is get more licenses into the neighborhoods that need them. So I know the panel is limited on time. I don't want to go too much further. I just want to point out that just handing a license to, generating a license that someone applies for doesn't necessarily dictate that the restaurant is going to be successful. They do need support from City Hall and need support from the community. I'm not sure if anyone saw the report recently in Inc. magazine, but it talked about the steps that a Boston restaurant has to go through to get open. And it's 92 steps, 22 forms, a minimum of 17 in-person activities, 9 different agencies, and 12 different fees. And that's all before one customer goes into a restaurant. So if there's another point that I just want a broader conversation topic for the future is, the restaurant cost continues to run, and there's a big cost to getting that restaurant open before any customer walks through the door. So how can we streamline that process and make it more entrepreneurial friendly so that they can at least get in the door? A lot of times new restaurateurs run into the struggle of they have enough capital to get themselves open. They don't have enough capital to survive the first 6 months. And so that's what we have to kind of collectively work at to help these aspiring restaurateurs operate successfully in the city. So thank you very much for inviting me today. I appreciate it. This is a very important conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Nia Grace, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, as well as
Good morning.
Guests here. I just also, on behalf of the Black Hospitality Coalition, just want to go on record to support petition 0435. I think that some of the research that will come out and have been discussed to get to this point is really key. We're just simply, and even to echo what Steve Clark said, the ability just to have the license doesn't guarantee a restaurateur success, but we really just need the access. And so that's what we are talking about right here, is to really focus on having the ability to have the access to even get to that point, to try to visualize success. So that's what I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Jody Adams, the floor is yours.
Thank you all. Thank you, Chair, and everybody who's here. Thank you, Steve, for speaking so poignantly to this issue. And thank you for inviting me to speak. I'm speaking as a restaurateur, and also as a resident of Dorchester. I've been in the restaurant business for 40 years. I was one of the chefs that helped build the foundation of Boston's restaurant culture. Michaelo's, Rialto, Trade, Porto, Saloniki. I currently have 3 full service and 3 fast casual, 4 in Boston, 1 at the airport and 2 in Cambridge. So I have a lot of experience. This is an exciting topic. I look forward to watching the evolution of diverse restaurant culture in Boston, and I think this is a really important part of it. Restaurants employ we employ hundreds of people, pay all kinds of taxes to the city and state, and we kept all but one of our restaurants open during COVID. For guests, alcohol plays an important role in where they choose to dine. Full service, sit-down restaurants are places where people gather to connect, create friendships and memories, celebrate joys and sorrows, and spin ideas. They do this around a table with 2 things, food and beverage. In our culture, for adults, the beverage is often a cocktail, a beer, or wine. And for many of us, They're part of a whole. They're part of a whole meal. A carefully prepared plate of food is enhanced, balanced, and completed by a paired glass of wine. To create this experience, a liquor license is critical and therefore critical to attracting customers to a restaurant. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't think I really need to go on with my testimony and story about the importance of liquor licenses. I just know that when we opened trade 11 years ago on the Greenway, on the corner of Atlantic Avenue and Congress Street, the Greenway was quiet. There was not much going on. The elevated rail had just come down. Occupy Boston, as you remember, was in full swing, and the seaport was yet to be built. There were few reasons for people to head our way except those who were already there because it was where they worked. We were taking a chance. We were making a commitment to help build and breathe life into the neighborhood and would never have opened trade without a liquor license. We anticipated and were correct that after 4 o'clock, those workers would be looking for a place to get a cocktail, a beer, or a glass of wine and a bite. And we were right. We are now an anchor in that neighborhood, and we are the reason that the landlord was able to attract the kinds of businesses and tenants to their condo and office buildings. During COVID, without people in offices, there was no business there. Trade was the restaurant of ours that remained closed for almost 2 years. Right now, office tenants are coming back only 3 days a week. We're busy on those days, but without a huge part of the neighborhood, the office building is dead on Mondays and Fridays. However, people are coming on weekends because we're a destination. We're a reason people are coming to the neighborhood. All neighborhoods in Boston need and deserve restaurants that bring people together where exciting things can happen. Restaurants create and reinforce the culture of a neighborhood and keep it lively and safe. Restaurants are in the business of food and beverage. They go hand in hand. And for adults, the beverage is often alcohol. In order to serve cocktails, beer, and wine, restaurateurs need liquor licenses. 90 to 95% of every dollar that comes into our restaurants goes right back out into the economy. And the more support that we can provide to restaurateurs across Boston neighborhoods, the bigger and stronger and better our city will be. And as I said, as a resident of Dorchester, I fully support providing the creation of restaurants with liquor licenses in my neighborhood. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're now going to go to Chris Maxey.
Thank you. My name is Chris Maxey, and I'm the CEO of Prefix Accounting. My firm exclusively works with the restaurant industry and with a focus on independent restaurants in the New England market. We provide full service accounting, payroll, and advisory services to restaurateurs. Nick Korn asked me to join you today because I believe I can provide some useful insight into the discussion of the value of an alcoholic beverage license for the full service for a full service restaurant. In the world of business, independent restaurants, sit-down restaurants are not a profitable endeavor. It's an industry of folks that are passionate about what they do, not how much money they make. At the end of the day, a successful 50-seat restaurant in an urban market might make over $1.5 million in revenue. But with slim profit margins averaging 5 to 8%, owners make a very modest income considering the effort that running a restaurant requires. Regardless, the economic impact of restaurants are profound. The best type of business for a local economy offers high revenue, low profit margins, high payroll costs, as these expenses are injected back into the local economy many times over. Opening a restaurant is a balancing act. These slim profit margins mean life or death for any restaurant concept. The largest drivers of cost for a restaurant are food and beverage, labor, occupancy costs, overhead, and general administrative costs. For a full-service sit-down restaurant, the occupancy costs and overhead are even higher, thus the lower bottom line. Full-service restaurants are generally establishments that have seating and table service. Thus, they require a much larger footprint and much more robust build-out cost than that of a limited service restaurant, which generally doesn't have much or any seating and offers a much more grab-and-go style of service. Regardless of the type of restaurant, operators group food, beverage, and labor costs together and compare it to revenue. This metric is known to many in the industry as prime cost. This is a restaurant's gross margin, and this golden number is 45%. I'm going to apologize right now because I might throw quite a few numbers at you. Achieving this number is a strong indicator that a restaurant is going to have a profitable month. Restaurants without a beverage license are entirely reliant on the profits from food and non-alcoholic beverage revenue. Expectations for profit margins for food are between 68 and 72%, depending on the concept. We must also consider the labor cost associated with this food production, which is roughly 22 to 25% of revenue. Together, this brings the profitability of food revenue down to 43%. Now, when a restaurant adds a beverage license to their business, two things happen. First, it increases the check average or the revenue per guest. Second, it adds a more profitable product to the mix. Profit margins for liquor, wine, and beer are roughly 78% based on the profitability of each type of alcohol. In addition to having a higher profit margin than food, it has a much smaller labor requirement, only 8 to 10% of revenue. Together, this brings the profitability of beverage to 68%, which is 25% more profitable than food. Now, I throw all these numbers at you because I'd like to illustrate a point. First, as I mentioned earlier, the target gross margin for a restaurant is 45%. For a restaurant only serving food, the average profit margin is 43%, dangerously close to the ideal. As I mentioned before, this is ideal, not actual. However, with the addition of an alcoholic beverage license to the mix, not only does it increase revenue, but it also increases profitability and brings the gross margin to a lower and much more achievable average gross margin. At the end of the day, these numbers are not real that you see day to day. It's very often that a restaurant encounters many additional unforeseen costs on a monthly basis, such as building maintenance and repairs, landscaping, decor, equipment rentals, inflation, COVID-19, and many other expenses that pile up from month to month. If a restaurant is just scraping by, any one of these expenses can mark failure as cash flow for a restaurant is often week to week or month to month. So with that being said, the addition of an alcoholic beverage license is absolutely pivotal to a full service restaurant success. That isn't to say that it isn't possible for a full service restaurant to succeed without a beverage license. It purely comes down to the fact that it makes the chance of success for a full service restaurant that much higher by having a little bit more room to breathe by offering alcoholic beverage to their guest. I thank you all for your time and consideration, and I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you. Nick Korn, the floor is yours. And then we'll go to councilor questions. And I just want to note, we were joined a while ago by Councilor Coletta, but we are also joined by Councilor at Large, Aaron Murphy. Thank you both for joining us. Mr. Korn, if you can go first, and then we'll go to the panel, to the councilors.
Thank you to the council and to the chair for providing the space to have this conversation about a really important issue and for inviting me to be part of that. My name is Nick Korn. I'm a small business owner and I'm a resident of Boston. I've been asked to sit on this panel because I've gathered information from all disparate sources at the city and the state level, including interviews with dozens of restaurant operators into a report that we're calling License to Succeed, which I've submitted as testimony to this council. The goal of this effort was to provide you with the data, testimony, and lessons from the past so that you may be able to build the most informed strategic policy that has the best chance of making it into law. However, I also see we're living in a world right now with structural limitations, institutionalized racism, and gross disparity. Our current licensing system is squashing innovation, it's excluding first-time operators, it's concentrating wealth and privilege, and it's preventing hardworking, innovative people from opening their small businesses here in the city of Boston. To build on what Councilor Baker said about developing neighborhoods and commercial districts, the lack of licenses is an essential piece of developing our neighborhoods and continuing to move into the future that we want for our city. Policy got us into this place, and policy must get us out. I'm here to voice support for the home rule petition to create additional restricted liquor licenses in the city. I'll defer to my co-panelists and to the experts from whom we've already heard to weigh in on the importance of restaurants in neighborhoods, the importance of alcohol sales for businesses to exist and to thrive. But with that in mind, I want to share 3 key points with you. First, at its core, in Boston, licensing is an equity issue. In the report that I've submitted to the council, we enumerate this point to a significantly further degree than I will go into here. But for the purposes of today, suffice it to say that there's an undeniable correlation between how white a neighborhood is and how many licenses it has. The unregulated secondary market for liquor licenses has concentrated them into particular neighborhoods at the detriment of others. If you look at page 26 and 27 of our report, you'll see Boston's neighborhoods plotted out according to demographics and licenses in those neighborhoods. And I'll share some key learnings from that data. Using the 2020 census data, Boston has 4 neighborhoods that are over 75% white and 4 neighborhoods that are over 75% non-white. When we compare those 2 neighborhoods, the 4 neighborhoods that are over 75% non-white make up 35% of our population, but just 9% of our licenses. On the other side, the 4 whitest neighborhoods of Boston make up just 9% of our population, but account for 21% of our licenses. In other words, there's 8 times as many licenses per person in Boston's most white neighborhoods compared to Boston's most non-white neighborhoods, and the trend line continues throughout. I hope that this work provides a baseline against which we can strive to do better as a city. As with so many other issues regarding equity, I'm optimistic about this administration, about this council, at looking at where we are, striving for a better future, and charting a path towards it. Secondly, restricted licenses can work, and we should have more of them. Of the restricted license holders with whom we spoke, many of whose voices are included in our report, the overwhelming majority stated that they would not have their businesses if they had not received a restricted license. With intentionality, I'm optimistic that the policy under consideration can build upon the lessons of the past and establish a fair and equitable system for the creation and allocation of more restricted liquor licenses in the neighborhoods that desperately need them. Finally, licenses should be seen as a first step. As one operator so astutely put it, a liquor license isn't a golden ticket. It's an opportunity to work harder. Steve already mentioned the Institute of Justice's Barrier to Business study, but Boston, among 20 cities being considered, was #1 in terms of how many steps it takes to open a restaurant, 92. That's more than any other city considered, and that does not include the process of obtaining a liquor license. A liquor license isn't a panacea, and building upon what Councilor Worrell said, Deputy Chief Morikawa, Director Persina, everyone mentioned that the city has programs to support operators and potential operators, but I believe the city could and likely should do more. We've included recommendations in our report based on feedback from operators that call for technical assistance, professional services, translation services, coaching, and financial support. In closing, restaurants have much larger impacts than just serving food. Restaurants create jobs, they create relationships, they create wealth, they create neighborhoods, and they create functional humans. I am who I am because of restaurants, and Boston is the city that it is because of our restaurants. Thank you to the council and to the chair for taking up this issue and for allowing me a few minutes to speak about it. As I noted previously, there's much more analysis, data, and testimony in the report that I've submitted to the council. I'm happy to do my best to answer any questions that the council may have. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. We're going to go in order of arrival for questions. I just want to note that Councilor Flaherty has been with us for some time. I didn't see his Zoom photo, but Councilor Flaherty has been with us for some time, so he's also joined us. For folks, that means that the order for questions for advocates is Councilor Worrell, Councilor Louis Jen, Councilor Mejia, Councilor Flynn, followed by Councilor Baker, followed by Councilor Coletta, followed by Councilor Murphy, followed by Councilor Flaherty. If anyone is unable to stay until their time, then we'll just go to the next person in line. So we're going to start with Councilor Worrell. If you have any questions for the advocates.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the advocates. Thank you for being here, and Nick, thank you for the report. And to Nia, I love the restaurant side. Thank you for you being a great business owner in the city of Boston. One quick question, well, I guess I'll make a comment. As a small business owner, yeah, I'm aware of all the steps that we have to do, the permitting here in the city of Boston, and I will be holding a hearing on barriers to business sometime next month. But speaking to that, when it comes to restaurants, can anyone talk to me about the costs associated with starting a restaurant, whether it's lawyer fees, permit fees, even rental costs, but I know that will vary from location to neighborhood to neighborhood. Can you kind of give me the steps and a ballpark cost of those startup costs that every restaurant will more than likely have to go through? And then also, my other question is, can you talk to me about the economic impacts, whether it's like a dollar amount or a percentage amount of how liquor licenses can help a restaurant? Because I really find it so impressive within my district of how many takeout restaurants have had the ability to expand and grow and stay in business for so many years without a liquor license. But just kind of want to get an understanding of the economic impacts of liquor licenses for restaurants. And then also anyone who has gone through the process of attaining a liquor license, if they could speak to that, and what can we do better as a city in our liquor licenses process and make it more streamlined or efficient, or just speak to the good and the bad of that process.
Great question, Brian. I would love to defer to Ms. Adams there, but with all her history. But I can just go from my experience with working with two. We couldn't give you just one ballpark figure because every restaurant is different. From the one that is 500 square feet to the one that might be 4,500 square feet, there are significant differences in costs. But one thing you can count on is that, it starts off with that lease, right? You might have an attorney that's dedicated for leasing. And if you are looking into full service or licensing, you might have an attorney that's different than that. And you'd be lucky to have one attorney who can address both the leasing and the licensing. In terms of equipment and build out, that's a cost. If you get into a second generation space, that tends to be of benefit to the restaurateur, where there might be some efficiencies that are already built out, your kitchens, your restrooms, some of the equipment that you might even be able to utilize. But sometimes using equipment from another restaurateur, 3 to 5 years even in existence, may not be to your benefit because you don't know what the issues are. And you might end up spending more money trying to do repairs than you would if you just bought that outright. So we went from our equipment to the build out, and now we're talking about furnishings. That's your chairs, your tables, your china. Making that decision is even something that is time consuming on what you are going to go with. Are you going to go with something that you might be replacing every month? If you've got a high volume place that has a lot of activity, you might be replacing that every couple of weeks, depending on. When you go from there, we're talking about our insurances, where that's insurance not just for the building. It might be for, you've got your workman's comp. If you have a vehicle, then you have that as well. Again, you are now getting into that space of your inventory. Your inventory is what you're starting with. And, I think a large challenge that I tend to mention is that for the smaller or newer restaurateur who gets into the space, they're not going to have the same kind of credit terms as others. And so often they're getting into the space with COD, cash on demand delivery. That means they're not going to give you that product until they have that money. When you do get a line of credit, even when you're starting out, you might get it for, in some instances, 7 days. So imagine having to bring in enough food or beverage and only getting 7 days on that, for which it might take about 14 days to even have the money to pay those bills. And so a lot of us, when you get started, you'll see us at the Restaurant Depot or somewhere else local in the meat district, or picking up our stuff because we don't have the credit to get a supplier that'll deliver it and actually give us some of our time back. So I think, and someone else can chime in and hit me where I might have missed some points, but the number, I would say even for the 2,500 square foot venue that's opening, and if it's new, I mean, the number is definitely in excess of $250,000, and that's on the low end, and it really just depends on your concept. And that didn't even count for if it was a full transferable, full value license, which can add on another $300,000 plus. I would just say, and then I can get off the floor with this, is that when we look at the value of a liquor license to a bill now, when we're talking about I'm serving up my food and whatever other amenities that I have, we're looking at least a 25% increase on a bill by having a liquor license. And that is significant for us in business.
Thank you so much. I don't know if anybody else would like to try and answer any of what Councilor Worrell put on the table. I see Mr. Corn, your hand's up, so please feel free.
I think Nia did an amazing job of speaking about the specifics of the finances of a restaurant. Her experience is way more specific and applicable. I'm not a business owner, but I will speak to, or not a restaurant business owner. I'll speak to a few things that she sort of tied to and that Councilor Worrell was asking about. So first, I think there's some pretty well documented information in the City of Boston Small Business Plan from a few years ago about disparities for certain neighborhoods and people of certain demographics when it comes to access to capital and loans. So to Nia's point, there's a number of issues that are sort of compounding at this place. In terms of just the cost of getting up and started, one of our operators that we spoke to has a business in Quincy, and they tried to open in Boston for a long time, and they ended up leaving the city. And they said, for the price of only the liquor license in Boston, I can now have my full restaurant built and open in Quincy. So that's a fundamental problem. Quincy does have restricted liquor licenses that they have allocated for Quincy Center. And if you've been down there recently, this is a city that is changing. And then lastly, I'll say that with regards to the impacts of licenses and specifically of restaurants in the city, there is some pretty compelling research about consumer spending at local restaurants versus at chain restaurants. And it's kind of undeniable that spending money in a independently owned neighborhood restaurant has twice as much recirculation of wealth back into that neighborhood than if a chain restaurant goes back into that space. So with the City of Boston supporting small businesses and with small businesses being engines for job creation, I think it's undeniable that among those small businesses and locally owned businesses, we need more restaurants, and specifically full service restaurants, to the points that Chris was making in our neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Worrell, if you have any, I saw Jody Adams, if you would like to answer that really quickly.
I just wanted to add on to this. I think that Chris probably could talk to the specific dollars and percentages and ratios, depending on the business, size of the business and that kind of thing. But to Nia's point, there are just so many variables to come to one specific number would be very difficult. I do want to say that what a liquor license does is allow for you can almost exhale, because the product is not perishable. The product, as I think Steve pointed out earlier, does not require a tremendous amount of labor. And so it's, as opposed to food, where food is perishable, there's a lot of labor involved. The liquor sales balance that, and it allows for business owners to grow their wealth. And I think that that's incredibly important to think about. I have both fast casuals and full service restaurants. The fast casuals are great. We employ a lot of people. There's a lot of dollars that go through the door, but it's not the same percentage on the square footage of the restaurant. You know, it's really hard to get a fast casual. And we have liquor licenses, and it's just, people don't think about buying liquor at fast casual restaurants. So you're dependent pretty much exclusively on the sale of food. You have to work harder for the dollars. So, and I think that what we're talking about in these neighborhoods is building wealth in the neighborhoods for the community members. And so I think these liquor licenses are critical.
Thank you for that. I want to make sure before we go to Councilor Mejia, I just want to make sure Councilor Rao, are you good? Are all your questions answered?
Yeah, all my questions were answered, and would love to continue, this conversation with the panel on, making sure that when there are commercial rebates or any assistance provided to these restaurants, that we're doing it in a real way, and that it's helping these restaurant business owners get off on the right start. So thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you, Councilor Rao. Councilor Mejia, I see your hand up. I wanted to go in order of arrival, so if you have anything you want to add really briefly.
Yes, really briefly. I just wanted to uplift something that Jody mentioned, and I'm so glad that she also talked about the employees. And this is also really thinking about, I'm the chair of workforce development and economic empowerment. And when our small businesses are doing well, so are the employees, and that helps everyone. So I think, again, I just want to underscore the importance of not only giving folks the opportunity to have access, but being able to set them up for long-term success should always be the way we're thinking about this work. And I do know that in the hospitality industry, it's one of those things that are always ebbing and flowing. And so I just, Jody, thank you so much for mentioning the employees, because I think that oftentimes we lose sight of the financial impact that these businesses have. So I really do appreciate you naming the employees as part of this conversation. We tend to focus on the owners. Yes, they're putting up all the money, but the employees are also helping to support that business, and we want to make sure that they're able to continue to work. So thank you for that. That's all.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Louis Jen, you are next.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. I want to thank all the advocates. I think it was an incredible amount of information that was shared with all of us today. Nia, I think the way that you broke it down made it just seem, it was very clear how hard it is for our businesses to get started, especially ones that lack capital especially in our Black and Brown neighborhoods. So appreciative of that. Nick, I appreciate your report, and I thought it was really helpful and very timely. And a question that I had, I guess this is more for Steve. So hello, Steve. I believe we met yesterday evening, so this is also timely. You pointed out the issues that you have with Section 2, but also acknowledge the fact that accessing these liquor licenses is really hard without, every time having to petition for more. And also the acknowledgement that the Inc. report, the Institute for Justice report, saying the barriers, how long it takes restaurants, like Ania was saying, to all the things that they have to do to get off the ground. So I see this automation as a really innovative way of helping restaurants, our goal should be, how do we simplify processes for businesses and restaurants? How do we make life easier for all of you, while not shortchanging the regulatory work that we have to do as a city? So short of that automation process that we're trying to achieve in Section 2, do you have an alternative that would make it easier for businesses to acquire these licenses that's in a way that doesn't require this overwhelming bureaucratic process?
So I just want to clarify. So the issues in Section 2 are independent of the issues that are cited in the report. And so the report that talks about, the Inc. report talks about going through the city process, interacting with 1010 Mass Ave, et cetera. Section 2 is going to create a number of licenses, and the questions are, where are they actually going to be distributed in the city? Mm-hmm. So I'm happy to weigh in on both sections, but I think it's two separate issues, and they kind of been blurred in the conversation. So just in terms of, and I think the report talks about, some of the ideas that could be done is, could there be a combination of permits that get issued from the building department? Or could the building department and the fire department permit be issued at the same time? You're always waiting for the different inspector for different agencies. So when you go into the process of 1010, it's a process, and you're waiting for different agencies to check off different boxes. Could those agencies be combined? Could there be a one-stop portal? And I do want to say the city does a great job of laying out the process. but it's a long process, and it gives you the information of how you're supposed to get into the maze. It doesn't really help you in the maze. And so is there a way that you could have an automated checklist that says, yes, you got the building permit, yes, you did this, okay, your one holdup is here, and this is why. And that's where I think technology would work, is that a business owner could go into that account and almost see their progress through the 13 steps that are outlined in this guide as just one further step of information available. I think a lot of the questions that come in are, oh, I think I'm waiting on this permit. I might be waiting on this permit. I'm not sure. And, it's just that slower process to do it. And then in the last question that Council Worrell had said that Nia answered perfectly, is the other cost that, there's quote unquote controllable costs from the restaurateur in terms of what they're willing to spend to build, what they're willing to do that. But then there's also costs that get put on the operator from the municipality, whether it's architectural designs, and you go to the community meeting and the attendee at the community meeting says, well, I don't like that tree, or I don't like that parking space. And then you have to go back to the community meeting again with another architectural rendering of the same process. And so that's where those costs also increase. And those are kind of uncontrollable costs because the municipality is putting those costs on the operator. And that's not Boston, that's all 351 cities and towns. So there's a lot of different things we could do in terms of how an operator has to get open, but those costs are definitely happening. But just streamlining what an operator has to do to get all those permits, and basically having someone hold their hand, whether it's an AI robot holding their hand or it's a city hall staffer. Whenever an operator calls me and says, hey, I'm having problems at 1010 Mass Ave, I say, call your city councilor. They have a voice. They're going to be able to make calls, do what have you, and as part of the constituent services. So that was.
I appreciate that, and I think I appreciate that as a response to the overall issues. But because you mentioned Section 2, sure. I wanted you to speak specifically to Section 2 and ideas you had to make that process of acquiring liquor licenses a lot easier and to automate it for our businesses. That's where sort of you expressed disagreement. So I'd like to know if you had any alternative suggestions there.
So the question comes down to, what does the city want to do? Does the city want to unwind itself from a quota process? Does the city want to continue to operate within a quota? And I think whatever the want is, there's different solutions in there. So it all comes down to, if you were going to build a perfect licensing system right now, what would it look like? Now, we're trying to go, unwind, as I said, 7 years of licensing. Listen, there's a number of different ideas that could do it. Do you address the supply and demand issue? Does the city just buy all the licenses that are out there and pick a rate and buy them all back and take off that situation? I'm just saying the issues in Section 2 are very, very complicated and require a number of conversations. And I don't think I could offer one solution to solve that section right now. I think we would need a working group on it to address those different issues. The biggest concern we have from operators is the replaced pledgeable asset that goes with securing loans, is that a lot of the growth, restaurant growth in the city of Boston, has come from pledging an existing license as an asset to go out and get a loan to build another restaurant. And if all of a sudden that inherent value goes away from that license, that asset needs to be replaced. And so now the operator either has to replace that asset with their home or with some other, guarantee to get that loan. And so that's the issues we see from the restaurant industry, is if that inherent value goes away, then that loan could be called, or the asset needs to be replaced. And how do you address that issue with licensees that have loans or have existing licenses?
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I see Mr. Korn has his hand up. The floor is yours if you'd like to take a stab at that as well.
Just to build on what Steve said, first off, I love the idea of some automation, but to the points of Deputy Chief Morikawa earlier, there's an accessibility and equity issue here as well, because there's a range of access to and proficiency with technology. So that should be considered. Not to mention the guide that Steve held up, I believe, is only available in English at present. And so there's translation and language issues that are also at stake here when we talk about diversity, equity, and accessibility. I love the idea of a working group. I agree with Steve. There's some policy work to be done to nail this down. And to his last point regarding the folks who have their equity, I guess, tied up in these transferable liquor licenses. I think it's really clear that no one is interested in this at this stage in removing any of the value from that. So a lot of these folks have spent six figures in the secondary market on these transferable licenses. Some of them have pledged them to banks, as Steve mentioned. Some of them see the future sale of these licenses as part of an exit scenario from the restaurant industry altogether. And so to them, I think this is essential in whatever form this policy takes, that we should make it really clear that, number one, no one is taking these restricted license or these transferable licenses away from you with this legislation. And to Steve's point, there's threads to pull and there's a Pandora's box potentially in the future. And I think based on historical precedent, and we talked about this earlier, and I know Chair Joyce mentioned it, that based on historical precedent, creating additional restricted licenses in neighborhoods should have no impact on the resale value of transferable licenses. And this proposed legislation does not have any issue or should not issue any additional transferable licenses, thus kind of dispelling any concerns about this supply and demand. So the idea here is this legislation, as I see it written, as I hope it will become, is to build a bigger table to allow operators who may have otherwise been excluded from the opportunity to open restaurants in neighborhoods to have access to that opportunity.
Thank you, Nick.
Can I just add, I just think Section 2 would create unrestricted licenses in the city. That's what I think would happen based on with the wording that's there. That would create unrestricted licenses across the city. That is the inherent concern.
Councilor Lieutenant, I don't know if you have any further questions with the clerk, please.
That's it. I really appreciate both the input from Nick and Steve here. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia, who will be followed by Councilor Coletta. Councilor Mejia. All right, we're going to go to Councilor Coletta.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to Councilor Rowell for introducing this. And I apologize for my tardiness earlier, but as a restaurant worker for over 10 years, from hostess to server.
I'm all good. I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Councilor Coletta.
So, yeah, I just felt like it was important for me to be involved in this conversation, just having an intermediate understanding of how restaurants operate, but just in front of house, certainly not back of house. But I do understand how restaurants can be economic engines, and I made most of my money as, or a lot of money as a 21-year-old serving drinks during the summer. So as the checks went up, so did my tips. But they are backbones of our neighborhood. So overall, I do believe in the power of restaurants to promote, the vibrancy of a specific neighborhood and create wealth in this city. And Nick, I so appreciate your comments. And I haven't seen the report, but I do look forward to reviewing it. And I know in my district, I do have I think the highest concentration of restaurants in the North End with liquor licenses, particularly the beer, wine, and cordial licenses. And on the flip side, in my district, I've heard that East Boston needs more of these licenses. So it's a priority for me that if we do get any additional licenses, that they are affordable, that they're accessible, and that somehow we can bake into this policy. And it does sound like we need a working group on this, but it's tailored, crafted, and intentionally allocated, if we can, to first-time business owners, Latinx small businesses. And just again, Nick, I appreciate your comments when you said it's a concentration of wealth and privilege. And so that gets to my concern, and I don't know the solutions, but I'm worried that if and when these licenses do become available, how do we make sure that those who don't have access to capital and therefore access to lawyers and therefore access in general, aren't missing out on this opportunity? So it does sound like we need a working group, and I still have a lot to learn at this point. So that's my only question right now. I'm here to listen and learn, but those are my concerns, and that's my priority at the end of the day.
Thank you, Councilor Coletta. Do you have a question there, or?
I don't have a question. That's just those are just my priorities. Like I said, I'm here to listen and to learn.
More than fine. Councilor Murphy, followed by Councilor Flaherty.
Hi, thank you. Kind of in a hallway on my way to another meeting, so I'm going to turn my video off, but I am here and listening. I myself, for 52 now, but for like 20 years as I was teaching and raising my young family, worked in restaurants. My daughter also getting herself through college, so know firsthand how important restaurants are to the economy. And we know that fewer industries have been hit harder than this pandemic than our restaurants, which many of you mentioned are gathering places. And as we're coming out of this pandemic, it has been great to see people gathering and getting back together. And also as supporting small businesses, knowing that the mandates and the requirements have been inconsistent and sometimes erratic depending on which industry, which neighborhood. So making sure that we're using the tools and finding creative ways to bring these resources back. Because like we said, there's the restaurant owners who, you know, put their heart and soul into their small businesses. And then there's also all of the employees that they employ. And many of you said in the report had really mentioned that the small businesses in our neighborhoods, if it's Cleary Square, Adams Corner, the North End, those dollars, high percentage, almost all of those dollars go right back into our neighborhoods. So it's so important to simplify this process and make sure that it's equitable across the city. So I'm here to listen, always to learn, but also to support and lend a hand however I can help make whatever burdensome there is in the way now to support and help once. And also I know people who get liquor licenses and then they need the support after they get it to make sure that the business, now that they have the license, but how do we continue to support to keep their doors not just open, but thriving? So no real question either, Chair, but thank you for holding this hearing, and sorry that my camera's off, but I've been on and listening, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor Murphy. Councilor Flaherty, if you have any statements or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully you can hear me clearly. Just about to run into it.
You're clear.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the comments today. And I understand obviously the issue, having had family that have been sort of in the bar and tavern business. I also understand and appreciate the role that the small businesses, the restaurants, the cafes that they play in our communities, hiring local folks, their amenities for our neighborhoods, which is great. I want to caution a little bit on sort of the broad strokes of, if you and Nick Corn, and I appreciated your comments in terms of just laying out the different percentages. I would like maybe if a little, just a deeper dive, if you back out the hotels, if you back out the Faneuil Hall and you back out, say the North End and in and around sort of Fenway Park and Lansdowne, and then we sort of do a deeper dive into the neighborhoods. I'd like to see what those numbers reflect. And also, in instances where folks have worked really hard. I'll give you my uncle as an example, worked 2 jobs, had to refinance his home to get a license. And he worked extremely hard, 7 days a week to maintain his business. And that's completely different than someone sort of coming in from New York, stroking the check, buying a license, a transferable license at say $450, $500 to put in, a fancy restaurant downtown or a hotel bar. So I think we need to distinguish that as well, and not sort of broad brush sort of those smaller, hardworking local establishments that more often than not, they're on the back of the T-shirts down at the Little League and the soccer field, and they're the first ones to contribute locally to different causes in our neighborhoods. Clearly, we have food deserts, and we need to address that. And I just also, it's interesting and timely that we're having this hearing today, when just yesterday we talked about how the taxi medallions were decimated, partly two parts. One was obviously the ride shares of the Uber and Lyfts putting sort of having a competitive advantage, I think, but 2, the onerous regulations of our Hackney division, the policies that went with that. And so I just want to, as we're moving forward with this, I just want to make sure that we're doing it judiciously. There are a lot of good license owners who work extremely hard and that have had to leverage, and they've had to put skin in the game and take a lot of risk. And I don't want to broad brush them with, sort of some of the heavy or the bigger capital players that have come in, in and around, say, the downtown area, or even in and around the South Boston waterfront. Completely different profile, if you will, from, the guy that owns the Corp, or, the guy that owns, one of my favorite spots over in East Boston. It's like those are the those are those sort of small local businesses. We need to continue to support them. And in many instances, they've really worked hard to get their transferable license. So by flooding the market, we potentially could decimate the existing transferable market. And I wouldn't want to see that. There are a lot of good people that have worked really hard. They're in all of our neighborhoods. And so how can we do it judiciously? I think that we also need to be realistic about how many licenses we will get when we go up to Beacon Hill and ask. So I want to make sure that we're managing people's expectations. So again, I appreciate everyone's comments. And I just wanted to add, I guess, my voice to that in terms of making sure that whatever we do, that we're not sort of, I guess, decimating the value of existing transferable, particularly as it pertains to those hardworking individuals and families that we all know throughout our neighborhoods. We clearly need to grow those opportunities in and throughout our city, and particularly in areas where we've termed them food deserts. But I want to make sure that we don't do what just happened to the taxi medallion industry, where a lot of good, decent, hardworking people had those medallions, those licenses completely devalued. Many of them have lost, who knows, their homes and their livelihood as a result of it. So just be careful, just be judicious, recognize the areas where we need to make improvements, where can we improve the policy. But I don't think it would be prudent to sort of flood the market at the expense of, good, decent, hardworking city residents that have great establishments, but target areas where we could uplift and create more economic opportunity for people, create more opportunities for people to open up shops and cafes, eliminate some of the onerous regulatory piece of it, and or have it be a one-stop shop down over at 1010 Mass Ave. All of that I completely understand. I just want to make sure that as we're working and trying to revitalize the taxi industry, that we don't sort of now have unintended consequences here while trying to uplift and help small local business owners and to get licenses into hands of folks that want to add value to our city and to our neighborhood. So a little bit of a question, Mr. Chair, and a little bit of an opine.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. I'm not sure if I caught the question part though.
I had asked if Nick Korn would be kind enough if he could maybe he did an evaluation in terms of licenses across the city, where they were, where they weren't, and I would really like to see his data. I would like to see if he would be kind enough to, if he would back out sort of the hotels, back out say the Faneuil Hall, the North End, and around Fenway Park. Those are sort of tourist attractions in areas like that, and then see what his numbers look like after we sort of draw out those three big areas where licenses, there's a significant amount of licenses in the North End, there's a significant amount of licenses in Faneuil Hall, and there's a significant amount of licenses around Fenway Park. I would maybe even argue that the Boston Garden, TD Bank. I mean, so if we could sort of lift those out, pull those out, I would love to see that analysis. His data minus those sort of four areas where there's a heavy concentration, there's a heavy saturation of liquor licenses, basically related to obviously TD Bank Garden, Fenway Park, Faneuil Hall, and of course the North End.
Mr. Korn, if you want to speak on that.
We can certainly do that work. I do think there's like a larger equity conversation. Obviously, we are the result of a long history of the city, but destinations and neighborhoods are part of what brings people to neighborhoods and what brings licenses. I will say, like, as a little bit of a dogleg, I'm happy to do that work, and we are in the process of getting more granular with this data. But with that being said, I will say we have a hard limit of licenses in the city, right? And so essentially it's a zero-sum game. I totally agree. And I think I mentioned a statement earlier. We're not trying to flood the market. We're not trying to, no one is proposing addressing or removing value from transferable licenses. And if you look at a report, there's a number of different arguments against the fact that restricted licenses, quote unquote, flood the market and deplete or depreciate that value. But because we have a zero-sum game, if you look at that hotel, I think that's a very interesting part of this piece. A lot of hotels, if you go and walk by a hotel in the Seaport, you should see the ghost of a neighborhood bar or a mom and pop restaurant that it is replaced, because we are in a zero-sum game here. So that license had to come from somewhere. And certainly some came from the airport and some came from other businesses, but many of them came from our neighborhoods. And so this is an undeniable pattern over time. And that research is ongoing as well for us.
And that's a great point, Nick. And through the chair, one caveat we may want to put on this ordinance is that you cannot transfer a license from one neighborhood to the next. That would prohibit the hotelier from coming in and grabbing the bar and grill off of Dorchester Avenue, or Main Street in Charlestown, or Center Street in JP. That might actually help, because that's exactly what happens. And it's a double-edged sword to the owner of those establishments. That's their opportunity for a day's pay. Their ship comes in, and that's their retirement. But then what we do see is we see licenses that have been granted to neighborhoods getting pulled out of those neighborhoods. And then to your point, Nick, that shop closes down only to see that pattern repeat. So I would be inclined to sort of be supportive of something like that, where or maybe we have a completely different category of licenses for hotels where they can't poach, if you will, from our neighborhoods. Pick one. It's just and speaking for my neighbor, we feel like there's an oversaturation. Council President Flynn and I, as well as our local electeds, like we're kind of sort of liquor licensed out, in Ward 6 and 7, and ideally we definitely would love to see some of those licenses transfer out to other neighborhoods to provide opportunities. But your point is well taken. People are paying, big capital investments, and partnerships are coming in, buying licenses at $500,000 for, a hotel or a sort of a fancy steakhouse downtown. In many instances, they're buying that license on the open market, taking it out of a neighborhood, only for that license to not return to that neighborhood. So anything that we could work on that front, I would be supportive of as well.
Thank you, Councilor Flaherty. And I am now going to just speak really on this. I'm one of the original co-sponsors on one of these. And what I will just say is, I went to law school in Chicago. Chicago has a very different way of how they handle liquor licenses. In my opinion, it's a better way of handling liquor licenses. And what they've essentially done there is they allow their aldermen to give out as many or as few licenses as they want. They actually have a bring your own beer culture there. So that actually means something, BYOB. But they also have several stages of their liquor licenses, but the liquor licenses there are not cost prohibitive in the way that they are here. And what that allows for is for talent to win out. And so when you go to a city like Chicago, largely you would not look at their top 5 or 10 restaurants and see chains. You would see local establishments, because what is pushing these things to success is no longer whether or not you have the ability to sell alcohol, because that's sort of been leveled. It's whether or not you have good food, good service, if you are creating a good restaurant, essentially. And so Chicago is a city that when I was there, locals would talk with pride about putting chains out of business. Like the Olive Garden was down the street. It's not there anymore, because we would they support their businesses. And part of that is giving businesses the tool to succeed. I think one of the issues here with Boston, and I'm just going to name it, is that a lot of these liquor licenses have been inherited from an era in which Black and Latino and people of color were not able to access this market. And so these were significant investments for those individuals at that time, and they have significant money leveraged into the securing of sort of not liquidating, similar to the taxi cab medallions, these liquor licenses. The issue is, frankly, the reason why those numbers look that way is because it was incredibly difficult for any person of color to have the capital or to have access to liquor licenses during the time period in which these were handed out or being given out. And we see that played out now. And so I think part of the balance for me is that is something that needs to be remedied. We have to figure out how to do that, because generationally, people have not had access to this. And in Boston, it is a prohibitive factor for creating a restaurant, is whether or not you can get a liquor license or not. And so, I represent Mattapan. I believe Mattapan at this point either has one liquor license in my section of it or none for dining on, for liquor on premises. And what that actually does is it has all these butterfly effects into food health in neighborhoods. So we've seen things like, because you don't have liquor licenses, you don't have sit downs, everything has to be takeout geared, and takeout geared food is not the same quality from a health standpoint in some cases as sit down restaurants. And so when they did the Boston Public Health Commission study on the impact of race on health, one of the things that I found very interesting was the butterfly effect of how liquor licenses and what that means for restaurant establishments actually impacts the health in those communities. And so there's all these sort of butterfly effects to these kinds of changes where we're really improving things. But one thing I want to say as a millennial on this council is that more restaurants, more establishments are good. I actually have no issue with expanding these. I frankly think that the market should be able to bear out, not based on whether or not we're keeping the valuation of somebody's liquor license. I understand the practical reasons for why we do that, but whether or not we have the market to sustain restaurants, period. And I think when we're limiting the amount of restaurants and the amount of opportunity to create them and have successful restaurants on the basis of keeping the evaluation of somebody's liquor license strong because they purchased it in 1950 or 1965 or 1975 or 85 or 95, I think what ends up happening is we end up with these chains and these hotels that dominate our market. And so, part of this for me is how do we do this equitably, where we aren't just devaluing everybody's. One of the things I thought about, and then I saw the prohibitive price tag for it, was maybe we buy out. Like, how do we get to a new model? I think it's kind of wild to me that we have to go to the state to figure out whether or not we get liquor licenses for the city of Boston. And so that power dynamic, I'd love to see how we get to that. I think that's what everybody's loved to see. But for me, I think the question that I have for the panel and whoever would like to answer it is, how do we balance in a way that is actually beneficial for all, remedying what are generational wrongs for getting folks into liquor licenses and have impacted entire communities and neighborhoods, while also understanding that there are people who have this liquor license that is a large part of the value of their corporation or their organization, and trying to balance that in a fair and equitable way. And so, I'm happy to give that to the floor. It's a big question, but it's really at the point of contention for this is exactly that. We want to add more licenses. The argument against adding more licenses is going to be, well, that lowers the value of these. And so how do we get to a place where we can add more licenses responsibly to deal with what are generational harms that I think have to be addressed, and frankly, are for the benefit of the city, to have more liquor licenses, in my opinion. And so, just in terms of the thought process for that, what are the pathways we think we can do that, and what are the ways in which we can try to make that work for the city? I don't know if anybody wants to answer that, and then I'll go to a second round of questions or statements from councilors. So I see Councilor Flaherty, I see Coletta, Councilor Coletta have their hands raised as well. But does anybody want to try and take a stab at that? Not seeing any takers, so we'll just go to the second round on that, and we'll try and figure it out. Councilor Flaherty, your hand first.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, I was just going to say you raised a great point in terms of so to have it be sort of, I guess, a level playing field and to not maybe get as much opposition from Beacon Hill as we would necessarily get. The idea probably would be just as what we're looking at doing maybe with the tax medallions and the APRA funds. Maybe we try to identify a way to buy back fairly, buy back the existing transferable licenses and then turn it into a non-transferable world, if you will, so that everyone that comes forward that has a business plan and they're opening up a restaurant in their neighborhood or in the downtown, wherever, that they're able to access a liquor license. So that may be the way to sort of, I guess, level the playing field, particularly as it pertains to the existing folks who throw no fault of their own or have worked hard and they've leveraged everything to hold on to the license. And at the same token, we get out of that whole transferable business, if you will. So you raised an interesting point, and I think it's worth pushing and exploring. I don't know what the dollar amount would be on that, but if there's ever a time where we're trying to change policies and we have opera funds available, we're looking to do the same with taxi medallion owners. Maybe we do the same with transferable license owners and just get rid of the transferable portion of it and turn them all into non-transferable. Level the playing field.
So this is something I was thinking about proposing at some point, I would want to say in 2021 when we knew we were getting ARPA money is, the system that we currently have for liquor licenses is actually very antiquated. It's very old. And the reason that it's not changing is because the state enjoys the power they have over the liquor license process, but also because many people, many families are invested they've invested generations of their own wealth into these liquor licenses. And so there's a fairness question here about you can't decimate that without some kind of compensation. But what if the city was able to purchase out sort of the available liquor licenses that we have through ARPA or through some sort of funding process or some way of doing that to then completely reinvent our liquor license process in a way that it should be current. I mean, we have a liquor license process that I think dates decades, to be kind, right? So like that's not this was not like an app-driven world when they were coming up with this stuff, right? Like so these kinds of ideas, I think you have to just eliminate what the current construct is so that we can get to a good construct. And one of the easiest ways that I thought we could do that is trying to just buy out all of these licenses, own them as the city of Boston, and just create a brand new process when you do that. I got told when I poked around on that, I was told that it might cost upwards of like $100 million or something like that. I don't know how accurate that is or isn't to do that. But we got significant federal ARPA money. Restaurants certainly were COVID-19 impacted. And I think there's a question about how we can move forward as a city to alleviate essentially what is the problem here is that people have paid a lot of money for these. And so you have to protect that investment. And so if you take that off the table, now we can do something different. And so, I don't know what the route is there. I think it's important enough to consider what could we do? Is it a good investment for the city of Boston personally to take this on? But those are the kinds of things that I'm also weighing out there and considering that you've been dealing with the liquor license problem longer than I have, Councilor Flaherty. I think it's interesting that you also sort of think that might be worth exploring. Councilor Coletta, and then I see Mr. Corn, unless Councilor Coletta would like to let Nick Corn go first.
Councilor Flaherty actually beat me to it because I was going to suggest this ARPA money going directly into protecting these licenses, the investment and the equity. As I mentioned yesterday on the floor, when the Hackney proposal was up, when I was chief of staff for then Councilor Edwards at the time, had proposed that the city buy back these licenses. And Chair Joyce firmly told us that we don't have the money to do that. And now that we have the money to do it, I think it is in our best interest to at least consider it. And thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for your work on this as well. And that was going to be my comment and my suggestion. I do want to look into this further because I think it is the right idea, and I think we are on the right track. And then on the flip side of that, we discuss these home rule petitions going up to the state, and they go up to the State House, and I don't actually know what happens to them. Like, when is the last time that the city of Boston has passed something in the State House? Because it got brought up when then Councilor, now Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, had introduced it in 2018, and then it was introduced again when John Barros was our economic chief. And so what is the track record? I honestly don't know, and this is a question to the panel, but what is the track record of these home rule petitions up at the State House? And what is our strategy moving forward to get something like this passed?
I'm happy to offer some comment on that, just because I've been in the role for up to 12 years, so for the past 12 years, so I've been a part of all the different legislative attempts that have gone through back to the 2013 successful navigation of then Councilor Pressley of 75 licenses, and then a couple of different efforts that are before. And I kind of highlighted this at the beginning of my testimony, is every time we've tried to do some dedicated licenses, some other issues get piled on in there. So going back to the last working group of the city council, and most of the city councilors in attendance were not part of that process. It was one of those things where every city councilor in the room said, well, I need 50 licenses. I need 50 licenses. I need 50 licenses. And so what started off as a conversation of bringing licenses to a dedicated area, I think actually increased 150 licenses in 15 minutes. We were sitting there and I won't single out cities, I won't single out neighborhoods, but it was one of those processes where every single councilor in the room saw that a train was moving and that more licenses needed to be added to it. And the bill kind of got, I think, and I don't don't work on Beacon Hill, but I kind of think that the bill just got too heavy for itself. Another time there was an initiative to try to give developers licenses. So if a developer was going to come into the city, they would actually get 10 or 15 licenses themselves. That was a different section. And that was my initial point, is like, let's just be careful of the other sections that get added onto this bill, because it does become a harder process and does impact it. So that's probably Beacon Hill's reaction, is when there's 7 different problems in one piece of legislation to try to address it. I think if you keep it clean and just have dedicated non-transferable licenses in the neighborhoods that need them, I think that's the most important part of what we're doing today. But this last part of this conversation is everything I was hoping to bring up when I raised concerns with Section 2. So that's kind of what I would weigh in on the different processes over the last couple of years.
Thank you. And Nick, if you want to just go in there. Or is your hand just
Certainly.
up?
No, I'm ready. To address a few points. So Councilor Arroyo said maybe this is a decade. This dates back to 1933 and 1934, the 2 months following the end of the repeal of Prohibition. So essentially every license we have today has its history in a time when Boston was a very different city. With regards to the buybacks, I want to reiterate that this is an equity problem, right? So buying back licenses, as Councilor Arroyo mentioned, we're living with a legacy of racist policies from federal, state, and city levels that have lasted for decades. And so there is a consideration of paying directly to operators for a city/state controlled resource that has been issued inequitably. With all that being said, I think, just to reiterate, I think this current legislation as it's written doesn't include the sort of total break of this entire system and its rebuilding. So I do think that what's currently being considered are additional restricted liquor licenses for neighborhoods that desperately need them. And the research shows that first of all, that legislation does not include additional transferable licenses. It will not devalue existing transferable licenses, but more restricted licenses in the neighborhoods that desperately need it will impact those neighborhoods. And then lastly, I'll say, I agree with Steve. The legislation gets a million things kind of tacked on, and these have grown and ballooned. And so with that in mind, I do think keeping it narrow and keeping it focused with the plan of, and again, if you read my report, essentially getting this through, and then kind of the second phase is gathering better data so that we can make a more informed decision about how to start to fix the system or make the system more equitable through and through. That includes addressing the concerns of transferable license holders, but the current legislation being considered has nothing to do with transferable license holders. And I think that's essential to keep that focused. And then lastly, to address Councilor Coletta, I know these weren't questions, but they were sort of statements put out into the ether. Each of the over the last 9 years, there's been between 9 and 24 different cities and towns who've submitted between 10 and 35 different home rule petitions for additional licenses over their quotas. Many of those have been approved. Some of those have been from Boston, and some of the petitions from Boston have been approved. Most recently, we had one, I believe it was last year, if not this current calendar year, for a single liquor license that went to the Speedway in the old state police barracks.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that is the end of the first round of questions. I don't know if anybody else has. I'm not going to go in order, just asking people, are you done? So if anybody has any follow-up questions for our advocate panel, I want to just thank our advocate panel and our administrative panel for what they've done today. Appreciate all of you. We do have community comment that I will be getting to, but I want to just know whether or not anybody has any other questions for this panel before I head to our public comment. And so in that case, I would like to give our panelists, if you have any closing, if you can make it brief, because we do have public comment coming in, but if you have any closing statement or closing thoughts you would like to leave us with, please feel free to do so. I see Jody Adams, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you so much. This is an amazing conversation and one that we've been having for years. I remember having a conversation about this issue with Mayor Menino many, many years ago. So it's super exciting. Anything I can do to help, please let me know. And I right now have to say goodbye. But anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jody Adams. Any other statements or anything like that? Otherwise, you're free to go or stay for community comment. And I want to just thank you all for your time and for what you've done today in terms of making this more clear for the public for the need of this and also where there might be some complications. So thank you, all of you, for that. I'm going to go to community comment. I'm just trying to see who is currently here for that. I see we have RP Thompson is listed. I don't know if you are here. Please make sure that you have your name as you requested when you emailed Christine O'Donnell to do public comment. Stephanie Boudreau, Bill Banfield, Cheryl Strotter, and Leslie Hawkins. And so we can go to whoever is available here, if you can bring them in for this part. And so I'm going to start with Leslie Delaney Hawkins. I see you there. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilor. And I really appreciate being on the other side and hearing this, and really appreciate all the thoughtful remarks from the other councilors and your colleagues and the licensees. I'm actually going to ask Bill Banfield and Nia Grace, who I represent for Jazz Urbane, to kind of take my time. But the one thing I want to emphasize is that, and I think that everyone knows this, but I know we've been discussing two different pieces of legislation together, that one of the pieces of legislation we're discussing today is the creation of those 4 licenses specifically for the bowling building and then the Strand. And then I'll let Bill and Nia speak to it, but that, at least from our perspective, is a very time sensitive issue. We've been working on this project since 2019, and I'll let Bill and Nia speak to that a little bit more. But I just wanted to make sure that we flag that there are 2 separate pieces of legislation today that are not necessarily dependent on each other. And with that, I'll give it back to you, Councillor.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Banfield, I see you there. The floor is yours. If you have to unmute.
Thank you for that. Are we good now?
Yep, you're perfect.
Thank you, council persons. It's great to be here. And Leslie, thank you. And it's just been great to hear all of the commentary. It allows us to really be more informed about what's going on with the community and what the processes are. Good morning. My name is Bill Banfield. I'm the founder of Jazz Urbane brand, both Jazz Urbane Recordings and Jazz Urbane Cafe, which is slated to open in Roxbury's Nubian Square. And I'm here today to offer testimony regarding the docket 0435, which is a petition, as you know, for a special law regarding an act authorizing the city of Boston to grant 4 additional licenses for the sale of alcoholic beverages on the specific premises. By the way of background, the Jazz Urbane Cafe is a live performance arts venue with a full service restaurant that my wonderful partners, Nia Grace, owner of Daryl's Corner Kitchen Bar, Teron Dorsey, and I are developing in collaboration with the city of Boston, and what we believe is the city's premier location now for such an establishment. And that is, of course, the Bruce Bowling building. The Jazz Cafe will be a 200-seat venue offering live local, national, and international entertainment and a full culinary program, including lunch, dinner, Sunday. Over several years now, we've made great progress towards launching this cafe restaurant and having assembled a team of arts and hospitality professionals. I'm glad you are talking about that, which includes employing artists as well. And as well, the design and construction experts to deliver the project. Moreover, we have made significant progress raising capital, and we hope we will be opening in the first quarter, actually, of 2022 now. However, all of this work could be completely undermined as we've been hearing the conversation, if we weren't able to have be able to afford and secure an affordable full liquor license for the Jazz Rebate Cafe. And I'm excited to see this happening here now. I was in these neighborhoods as a full-time Boston public school teacher working at Madison Park High School. So knowing the kind of transformation this is going to have for the area, and that was 40 years ago, is absolutely is wonderful. But as a startup for this venture now, we are not in the position to purchase a license on the open market. If there were licenses available, that cost, as you all mentioned, is at $300,000 or $500,000, and that's absolutely prohibitive. Moreover, we're not able to obtain, were we not able to obtain a full liquor license for not just beer, liquor license, the very fundamentals of our business plan would need to change, and that likelihood could build and grow and economically be sustainable in these neighborhoods. And we've talked about not only hiring people in the neighborhoods, but I also like to say transforming the neighborhood with arts and culture and what we're doing with this restaurant venue. We would like to urge the council and the city of Boston to urgently authorize the 4 proposed licenses for the bowling building, and to do so separate and apart from other liquor license proposals that will be vetted during, as we're hearing today's hearing. That licensing is not an overnight process, so time is really of the essence here to act on this in a straightforward, common sense proposal that would not only allow us to stay on course for an early 2023 open, but would further help deliver the promise of the bowling building being an economic engine for this area that is so needly for Roxbury and the city broadly. So we thank you for your attention to this matter, and we thank you for the leadership that I've heard, and we know it's going on for a while, to finding a creative solution to further stimulate economic growth development in Nubian Square. And your partnership in helping us launch the Jazz Rebate is very, very important and critical to that. And so we look forward to making Jazz Rebate a home for everybody here for the city, and for the artists that are going to be coming to that square, both international artists and local artists, which are very important. So I think all those things come together. So we've been very appreciative to be invited here, and I hope that we'll be able to have more discussion about this in the coming days.
Thank you so much, Mr. Banfield. I don't know if anyone else who is scheduled for public testimony is actually here, so I'm just going to do a quick call through. Stephanie Boudreau. I don't see you. Cheryl Strotter. I don't believe she is here either. And RP Thompson from Upland Property Management. Okay, so with that, if anybody would have liked to give public testimony, or if you still want to give public testimony, you can still email the committee at I believe it's ccc.go@boston.gov, and we will disseminate that to the council, and that will also be part of the public record. I want to give the original sponsors the ability to give a closing on this, so that would be Councilor Louis Jen, followed by Councilor Worrell, followed by Councilor Mejia. If any closing that you would like to give, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank everyone, all the advocates, for being here and the testimony that you gave. I think there's a lot of excitement around what we can do to solve like long-term systemic issues. And there are also short-term solutions for the bowling building, and there are short-term solutions for our neighborhoods where we need to really think about how we're driving economic opportunity into our neighborhoods with these non-transferable restricted licenses. So I'm excited to do the work for both like the short-term to address the issues and the long-term systemic issues. So thank you to everyone for being here.
Thank you, Councilor Jen. Councilor Worrell, if you want to give a closing.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the advocates in the panel and the administration for joining us today. And I think we have heard that there's a consensus for corrective action in righting the wrongs of this inequitable distribution of liquor licenses. And I'm looking forward to speaking with all the advocates and the panelists on the details and working that out in the next working session. So thank you, everyone, and looking forward to making sure that we create walkable amenities in all of our neighborhoods and are pushing for economic development in all our neighborhoods and being able to create each neighborhood as a destination. So thank you, and looking forward to working on this.
Thank you, and Councilor Mejia.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, for hosting this and walking us through the process. And thank you to the sponsors and my co-sponsors for shepherding us along. And more importantly, to the advocates and to those who are living the realities and doing the work, right? I think this working session really helped us get clear on some of the barriers that folks face. And as we continue to have these conversations, is like what we learn in these sessions and what we do with the information that we hear here is what really sets us up for success. So my hope is that as we're thinking about the short term and long term, that we're thinking about the big picture and righting the wrongs. And so looking forward to what comes of this, but more importantly, what we learned from here and what else we need to do to move the work forward. So thank you. It's always so great to see so many beautiful people and really do appreciate the time and energy that you put to inform our thinking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Mejia. I just want to also thank all of you, including our community members who waited for public comment and our administration. This is obviously a very pressing issue for the city of Boston. It's one I hope to see us get this sent up. So the next step in this would be a working session. But I thank all of you for your commentary and for your lived experiences that you've added to this to allow us to really craft and refine that when we get it done. So thank you all for your participation. Thank you for putting all of this there and out in the public so that we can have this very public conversation. And with that, this hearing is adjourned. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.